host, Tina, and here with me today are Felix.
Hello.
And Faye.
Hi.
And today's topic is the Villainous Crush trope. And to help us with this discussion is our very special guest, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince of Planet New, Prince Lotor of Voltron, Defender of the Universe.
Hello, girls.
It's such an honor to meet you, Your Highness. I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us on today's subject. Not like you don't have any experience with this, I'm sure.
It's true love. She just doesn't know it yet.
And that, guys, I think is the best introduction we could have to describe the Villainous Crush without busting out a dictionary.
Well, this trope is hands down one of my personal favorites, probably because both the dramatic and comic potential are through the roof. And I'll be honest, I almost always secretly root for the villain or the villainess with the crush.
So, let's talk about that. Why do we root for the villain? Well, when it comes to villainous crushes, it allows us to see the more human, vulnerable side of the antagonist, and flip audience expectations on its ear. This also isn't always the case with signify a potential redemption arc, and those get me every damn time.
Oh, me too. And I've always had a soft spot for tragic villains, and I tend to identify with quote-unquote monsters who have a sad or troubled backstory. And also, there's something incredibly self-righteous about the goody-two-shoes hero who pretends they don't have a thing for the hot villain, who is almost always reflective of some aspect of the hero. Like, I'm sorry, but who are these people? Nobody I know.
Random tumblerinas, maybe, nobody's ever met. Again, I'm going to say these people don't actually exist and are just figments of the internet's imagination.
I concur. Wait, what's this about a redemption arc?
Stop fist pumping the air, Lotor. But of course you're going to concur, at least with that.
Well, let's be real here. If Charlize Theron's evil queen from Snow White wanted to get dirty with anyone in the audience, you'd say yes. I mean, it's one thing when it's someone gross, like Darkness from Legend, or Frollo from Hunchback. But when it's a chiseled, handsome guy like me, and Allura is all,
"Oh no, I could never. Not with a villain like you, Lotor."
Well, now, I was thinking more like Poison Ivy or Jareth, but yeah, it's like, oh, shut up already. Get down off your pedestal and get into the gutter with the rest of us. Yes, you would. Oh, that's exactly what I keep telling the princess. Yes, you will.
Yeah, yes, she will, and just like one day, Rey's parents are going to come back for her.
Well, you know, Your Highness, Ben and Rey had a version of that, too, with their, I'm not giving you anything, we'll see. Oh, and Ben, if you're listening, just so you know, I know we kind of gave you hell in our last podcast together because of the botched proposal, but I want to tell you how much I cackle at we'll see in The Force Awakens now, because we sure did see in that hut, am I right? See, there's hope for you yet, Prince Lotor.
So let's talk about the definitions of what a villainous crush trope entails. What is a villainous crush? Well, simply put, the villainous crush occurs whenever a villainous character has either romantic or sexual feelings for a heroic character or a heroine. So what does this look like? Well, it looks pretty much like all the tropes of a traditional romance, but with a dangerous and downright creepy slant, because, hello, villain. So you might have, like, villain coming too close for comfort, watching her while she sleeps, the roving eyes, and of course the proposal. Don't forget the proposal. And of course, one of our favorites here at Star Wars Connection, the bridal or monster carry, especially when it crosses the threshold.
Say, that's one of my favorites too.
Something else with your villain, with the crush, is probably going to do an attempt to woo the object of affection very poorly.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. Your villain is self-centered, and especially if they have some kind of tragic backstory, they're not typically going to know any better. So they're going to offer the hero or the heroine something that they themselves would be flattered or tempted by, kind of like a cat who leaves a dead mouse by your pillow.
Yeah, that's awesome. For instance, our friend, the Crown Prince here, has conquered entire planets to make them worship Allura.
I even gave up my harem for her, and yet she slips through my fingers like wind through autumn trees.
Wow, that is so poetic, Your Majesty.
Well, like the Crown Prince's weekly marriage proposals, Ben not once, but twice proposes to Rey that she should come be with him. In The Force Awakens, he asked her to be his student. In The Last Jedi, he asked her to rule the galaxy with him.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that it has all the tropes and patterns of a traditional romance because, well, that's absolutely true. Both traditional romances and villainous crushes will have, for example, long drawn-out stares, touches that last too long, the two sharing proximity that is way too close to be platonic. Of course, if it's one-sided, this may come off with vibes that code the villain as creepy, or worse, a sexual predator. And as you said earlier, Darkness from Legend would fit this particular trope. Jareth from Labyrinth, while also one-sided, isn't creepy at all. He's actually straight-up temptation, even if Sarah never accepts his offer to love him back. However, as we all know here, it is not always one-sided, and there are many cases in both movies and literature where the heroine will show sexual or romantic interest. Usually these are accompanied by the suppression of feelings and denial, but to the audience, they're well aware of what's happening. And yes, I'm sure Rey of Jakku has no idea what I'm talking about. Cough. And when it comes to a two-sided romance that began as a simple villainous crush, that redemption arc I mentioned earlier, that's coming full steam ahead.
Well, on that last point, Tina, not necessarily true. However, that has to do with the genre. So in fantasy, absolutely. In psychological thrillers, two-sided romance with a villain does not necessarily equal redemption, which we'll talk about. So, good thing for Rey and Ben, Star Wars is a children's fantasy movie. But we're actually going to reference some broad examples of works in which the villainous crush trope appears. More often, it's a male villain crushing on a heroine. So as Tina mentioned, Jareth to Sarah in The Labyrinth, Prince Lotor to Allura in the 1980s Voltron. And now, just taking a moment here, the reason we use this Lotor as opposed to the iteration of Lotor from Voltron Legendary Defender, which we're also big fans of, by the way, is because when the feeling is mutual, this is actually a different trope called dating Catwoman for obvious reasons. Rey and Ben actually move from Ben Solo's villainous crush into dating Catwoman territory in The Last Jedi, when Rey reaches out with her feelings in the hut and then tries to tempt him back to the light in the elevator. Rian Johnson tells us that by the end of The Last Jedi, they're enemies, but now they're complicated enemies. Kind of like that Facebook status. It's complicated, but much like Batman and Catwoman's relationship. Speaking of Catwoman, this leads us into villainesses with the hots for the hero. Now, female villainous crushes do exist. Batman fans will definitely know this. Many of the villainesses have had a thing for the bat at one point or another. And actually, maybe my favorite of the Batman villainesses with a monstrous crush is probably Talia al Ghul, because her drama queen meltdowns can put the Renferer's jilted lover meltdown to shame. And it generally boils down to, A, her daddy issues, like we've never seen those with a villain before, and B, her feeling like Batman isn't paying enough attention to her. Well, maybe he should pay more attention to her. Even when Allura is across the galaxy, all I think about is her, and wine, and sometimes other women, I won't lie, but mostly I think about the day I finally make her my queen.
You know, Lotor, I gotta wonder if both Rey and Allura, one of these days, who knows the situation, but I can see this happening. One of these days, those two are going to get just so exasperated with all the marry me and be my queen BS that's been hurled their way, particularly from you, Lotor, that one day they're just gonna join forces and say, you know what? Let's team up together and rule the galaxy with each other. Whose galaxy will we pick? Doesn't matter. That'll show them.
What?
I think you heard me right, Lotor. Sorry to say, but I'd love to see that, because the two of you Renfering together over your two fair maidens deciding who can be better rulers by themselves may be too much for either galaxy to handle, but the ratings of both franchises are going to go through the roof. So I will say this, you'd better pray that nobody introduces them, because that's exactly what's going to happen once they compare notes. Anyways, getting back on track, Felix, please continue.
So we're going to talk about how the villainous crush tends to develop. So let's start with this very basic premise of storytelling. A story requires conflict that builds toward a climax, which is the turning point of a story. So if a story has no conflict, then it is not a story. It's a flatline, which means dead on arrival. So with that in mind, if your story introduces a villainous crush, that means it has to evolve in some way. So a villainous crush will follow one of these 4 basic patterns. So starting with option A, it will get worse and worse with the villain vowing to destroy the love interest or those she cares about if she will not be with him. So my first example is actually mostly subtextual, but it's definitely well known and worth mentioning. The Joker has a villainous crush of sorts on Batman in several iterations of the series. He makes a lot of sexual and marriage jokes, especially in the comics, and considers them a metaphorically married couple. It borders heavily on text rather than strictly subtext in the comics, but it stays subtext in the Nolanverse. But yeah, any way you look at it, the Joker can be considered to have a villainous crush on the Bat. He wants to either keep him in his possession because he considers their relationship a fun game, or he wants to destroy Batman mentally.
It's funny you mentioned this. I watched The Dark Knight last night, and Heath Ledger's Joker seems really shocked when the Bat would think he'd want him dead. Villainous crush or not, he definitely enjoys the game and doesn't want it to end.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Gaston in Beauty and the Beast and Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame are actually, they're also more traditional prime examples of this type. That can actually tell us all about Frollo.
Frollo, sorry, French word, Frollo was the archdeacon of Notre Dame in 1831 novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I will reference mostly the novel, though we are probably going to use images for our video from 2 cartoons and some art. As a cleric, she wasn't supposed to feel any sexual or romantic passion for anyone, but when he met the beautiful gypsy Esmeralda, she had the classic villainous crush on her. So at first, he was a well-meaning helper, but his courtship became more and more aggressive and vile. So Esmeralda grew to despise him, and she rebuffed him several times. That fanned the flames of his desire, but also of his villainy, because he proceeded to make life miserable not only for Esmeralda, but everyone that she loved. Her friends and the man that she was in love with. Basically, this is the case of villainous crush progressing to worse and worse. Things that she suffered because of his villainous crush was that she almost burned for a witch on the stake, and then she was tortured, and finally she was taken to the gallows. Now, while watching Esmeralda hang, Frollo laughed like a maniac. Okay, you get the picture, right? So probably that started the trend of the ultimate irredeemable villainy that cannot be complete without an evil laugh. Like examples, you have Lord Voldemort, Emperor Palpatine, like any super villain basically has to have the scene in the moment when he's like laughing like in a maniac. So Frollo is the purest example of villainous crush that remains villainous crush with the emphasis on villainous, since it drove the character to do more and more evil deeds until he died unrepentant. Now, like with all trope, the use of this particular trope also depends on the time when the story originated and who the players are. So in this case, while the story is critical of clerical France in mid-19th century, nobody dared to write Thornbirds, like with the priest and his beautiful protege falling passionately in love, having sex on the beach, like having the baby, stuff like that, it was conservative times, so, you wouldn't dare to do that. Frollo's villainous crush was basically painted into the corner and couldn't develop into something more romantic or novel because his station didn't allow for wiggling that would be socially acceptable.
Oh, right. I absolutely agree with you on that. And guys, don't kill me here, but initially, Kylo's arc is similar to Frollo's. So you hear several of us at Star Wars Connection colloquially refer to Kylo's crate antics as the Emperor's epic jilted lover meltdown, because that's what it is. I mean, his vow to destroy her and you and all of it is a direct result of Rey's rejection of his dark side rulership proposal that is obviously totally platonic and not at all because he was just staring her down in the elevator. And if she won't be with him, then no one else can have her. And that's very typical fare for a villainous crush. Now, I know some of you are internally screaming right now, but hang tight because we're not done yet. A couple of things make Kylo strikingly different from Frollo, namely the story structure, which we'll talk about a bit later, and the fact, like Bad mentioned, that this story is written in a different era in which women are, well, as long as you haven't meandered into the more purity-driven dregs of Tumblr, seen as being sexually autonomous and capable of choosing for ourselves, and that choice might even include making mistakes.
Right on. Like, we don't want any Mary Sues and, like, right on. Yes, mistakes make you human and relatable. It's good.
Definitely. Tagging on to what you both said in comparison to Frollo, Ben Solo's coded as more of an anti-hero than straight up villain. And when someone is coded like that, as in Ben's case, when he yells, "I'll destroy her," it's almost the exact opposite. Forgive me for what I'm about to say. I can't help myself. I have no filter. In this scenario, the only thing he's going to end up destroying is her pussy, and that's about it.
Right on.
Yeah, anyway, I hope I... So, just like in TFA, when meeting with Snoke, by the grace of your training, I will not be... I always thought, as far as comedy goes, that was one of the best lines in TFA, because given how it ended with Ben and Rey looking more like they're engaged in some sort of passionate lovemaking with those choker shots, as opposed to straight up lightsaber. That's exactly what ended up happening. So this brings us to option B. The villainous crush, which is by definition a possessive and self-centered sensation, transforms into its opposite. Selfless love, as the villain transforms him or himself into a heroic or anti-heroic character because of the power of love.
Alright, so opposite type of villainous crush that you just mentioned, like opposite to Frollo type, is the Templar and the Jewess from 19th century novel Ivanhoe by Walter Scott. The Jewess name was Rebecca, and he was the Templar, and they were the Navy SEALs of their time, like best trained fighting unit in the world with long tour of duty in the Holy Land, which was constantly in war. So they were the most badass of all knights, and the most badass of the Templar knights was our Templar in the story. As a warrior monk, they weren't supposed to have sexual contacts, but this Templar didn't give two figs. He was a womanizer, had a reputation that he ravished his way from Jerusalem to Paris. So when he met Rebecca, a beautiful Jewish healer, so you can see, a warrior and a healer, yin yang, he thought that she was a loose woman and the mistress of his rival. So that was instant villainous crush, like she's beautiful, belongs to another man, so yeah, like a classic villainous crush. When they met, basically he kidnapped her and he told her that he had many godless harlots like her, and he almost raped her against the wall. Although he wasn't really a rapey type, he believed that consensual was like preferable option, but because he mistook her as like a loose woman, he thought that she will comply and would be like, yeah, let's do it, but that didn't happen. Instead, she managed to escape, told him that he could have her body, but he will never have her soul, and then, went upstairs, threatened to throw herself off the tower. So when she was standing there so defiant and, ready to, defend her virtue, from him by throwing herself to her certain death, he thought that she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen and realized that she was actually pure virtues. And from that moment, his villainous crush turned into love. So he wanted her to love him back, and also he wanted to have a soul again. So now some people will say this is the case where a good woman, turned a bad man into a good one, but it isn't so. It's mostly that he saw her goodness and wanted to be good himself because of that, he liked what he saw and realized that, that's something he was striving for. Anyway, so from that moment onward, he started to court her, and it turned out that they were really well matched because they were well educated, like loved books, played chess, that sort of thing. And he also wanted to protect her from religious persecution. He wanted to marry her, make sure that she can practice healing, because that was also forbidden at those times, and stuff like that. Just use his influence to give her a really good life. And the chemistry, of course, was amazing between them. But she kept rebuffing him because he was a Christian and their faiths forbid such union. And she was also in love with his Belzewood rival, who was two-timing her and the lady he was going to marry eventually. So it's a love quadrangle, don't ask. So this, it's true, the story takes similar turn to Esmeralda's story, when Rebecca found herself on a trial for sorcery and sentenced to burn for a witch. However, unlike Frollo, the Templar did everything in his power to save her and prevent that outcome, even though Rebecca repeatedly refused to run away with him. At one point, actually, she said that, if he loved her truly, he would set her free. And so finally, he told her to go without him, just, because her life was so precious to him that he didn't want love or anything, just, just to preserve that she was okay. But it was too late, and through some machinations, his Templar buddies thwarted his attempt to be her champion at the trial by combat. So that meant that he was forced to fight for her accusers, and his win would mean her death. So when her champion arrived, and that just happened to be his Belzewood rival and her secret love interest, the Templar sacrificed his honor and life by intentionally losing the fight so that she could live. So that was the noblest of sacrifices, because he disgraced himself to his order and to the code of chivalry, and got nothing in return, because she didn't love him, but loved the man who will end up killing him, because he allowed that rival to kill him in order to save Rebecca. So that was the purest form of Villainous Crush that turned into selfless, unconditional love. Like Frollo's Villainous Crush, this is also a product of its time. So the writer was not going to endorse interfaith marriage between a Christian and a Jewess in 19th century, nor the Templars' conversion to Judaism, even though in the book he was actually ready to do just that, and that would make their love possible. But that was taboo, in those times when Walter Scott wrote the book. So this story was too written into the corner and couldn't end up in any other way but in tragedy. Another interesting part of this story, she be tried and sentenced to burn. He burst into her cell and told her what was going to happen, and begged her to escape with him, and told her that he loved her, but she refused to leave. So he got angry and said that she should be damned and burned for a witch and left. Then 5 minutes later, at the trial, he gave her a note that said, you should ask for trial by combat, that's going to save you, I'm going to, fight for you, that sort of thing. So my point is that Villainous Crushers who are going toward true unconditional love have the right to get impatient and angry at so much rejection. For example, Kylo killed Snoke to save Rey because she forced his hand with her unannounced arrival. It was Snoke on her, and Kylo chose her. He had no plan. He just knew he had to do it, and he barely held it together when Snoke started to torture her, undoubtedly as the test for Kylo to see if he's a Solo or Vader. It was total never tell me the odds situation, because his odds were catastrophic. If Snoke busted his intention, he and Rey would be both dead, or just Rey, because Snoke would make an example of her to remind Kylo of his failure. So it was super hard for him, and when he killed Snoke, he screwed up on First Order side, like he screwed up on Leia's side when he killed Han. So he had nowhere to go, but at least in First Order situation was salvageable if he and Rey worked together, because they were so powerful. So after all that he's gone through for her, she was like, oh, I need you to save the resistance. That's why I'm here, not for you. If he blew up and yelled, I will destroy her, can you really say it wasn't his right to vent? Like, feel that he had it enough? Like, he was in terrible situation. Because he loved her and he proposed to her. He bare his feelings that he was forced to repress. That was the requirement for the Dark Lord. And then she tried to pull a saber on him like his uncle, so that was really a betrayal. He felt betrayed. Nobody can convince me that moments of weakness and selfish impulse and going, what is there for me? What am I getting out of this? But rejection and misery. I mean, screw it, I'm out. She can burn if she wants. I'm gonna help her with that. Nobody can convince me those are deal breakers. That's a normal phase. That's human and that's relatable. What counts is whether the anger ever passes, which it didn't in Frollo's case. And what happens when it does? In Kylo's case, that not the sofa face, or in Templar's case, dying for Rebecca. That makes the difference between Frollos, who never get better, and Spikes, who get better. Spike, I mean, Spike for Buffy, right? So just for the audience.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Spike too, and absolutely I agree with you, and I'll add to that Kylo's I'll destroy her is also perfectly in character for Skywalkers in the first place. I mean, hello, Luke had his own I'll destroy him moment before immediately deciding, I guess maybe I shouldn't kill my depressed sleeping nephew then. So I agree, Kylo is absolutely more of like a Spike from Buffy type. But Spike, like Ben, actually belongs in kind of a slightly different category, and we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Oh, yes, I agree about that. And what I want to say is that option A, which is a pure case of Villainous Crush that remains Villainous Crush to the bitter end, and option B, which is the pure case of Villainous Crush becoming, completely selfless, unconditional love, don't apply to Kylo, because in both cases, the love is not returned. Feelings are not returned. Kylo's case, he and Rey are soulmates, they're attracted to each other, they have mutual feelings and attraction. I mean, she initiated the hand touch, and Rian Johnson said that was the closest the Star Wars will probably come to a sex scene. So in translation, she initiated sex. So that's mutual feelings, right? So Kylo's feelings are not unrequited. They're very much returns, which are about unrequited love, do not apply to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And actually, there are also structural reasons why Kylo is a better fit for what's going to be our option D. But we're actually going to cover option C before that. So option C is a combination of A and B, with a character appearing to become heroic only to double down on either destroying or possessing the heroine. So this one is actually kind of rare, or at least it's the one that I have seen or read the least. So one example I can think of is Dr. Horrible, who is the villainous protagonist of the musical series by the same name. So he's a supervillain with a crush on the girl next door. The hero of the story is actually kind of a douche canoe and treats women like crap. And one of his more notable lines referencing his weapon of choice is, "The hammer is my penis." And so, you can tell just he's kind of douchey, and he's trying to get into the girl next door's pants. The tragedy of this story is that Dr. Horrible kind of considers himself this dorky nice guy type, especially when compared to his douchey jock hero. But Dr. Horrible fails to see that his own self-centeredness will ultimately prevent him from being with the heroine as well. In fact, just when she's starting to take a real interest in him as a person, he ends up accidentally killing her himself while trying to take out his douchebag rival. This, by the way, ends up pushing him over the edge into the ultimate supervillainy he was trying to achieve, albeit in a very ironic way. Another example is Hannibal Lecter, specifically from the novel. In the movies, he sacrifices his own hand so that he can escape without harming Clarice, which is kind of out of character. But anyway, he develops a villainous crush on Clarice because he sees her as his equal in intelligence and good manners. She thinks like him, but she's his opposite, his foil, in that while he is a sociopathic cannibal, she is a supremely compassionate and empathetic character, and is in her job to genuinely help save people. So, of course, Hannibal becomes fixated on her, taking an interest in her professional growth and mentoring her in her field. In true villainous fashion, he alone is allowed to toy with her mind, but no one else is allowed to remotely disrespect her. For instance, after a fellow inmate throws ejaculate at her, gross, Lecter gets into said inmate's head so successfully that he's able to talk him into committing suicide. So at the end of the first novel, Lecter writes to her that he has no plans to call on her because the world is more interesting with her in it. Oh, isn't that sweet? And and he suggests that she extend him the same courtesy. So it seems Lecter values her autonomy and improves in as much as a character like Lecter is able to. However, although the next novel starts with Lecter seeming to take an interest in helping Clarice, whose career has suffered 7 years down the road from when they first met, it ends with him kidnapping and attempting to brainwash her into thinking that she's his sister, and there's kind of this whole weird Freudian deal there that I'm not going to get into. It's a whole other can of worms. But although Clarice is able to convince him to let the whole sister thing go, the brainwashing has worked to the extent that Clarice becomes his lover, and she and Lecter end up cannibalizing her terrible boss.
Can I just interject for a second? When you mentioned that Lecter, values Clarice so high and doesn't let anyone else, hurt her, it's similar to how Rey and Kylo feel about each other. Rey is somebody who's going to shoot Kylo first and pull a saber at him, but if somebody else is about to hurt him, she is going to, beat you up, kill you. She beat up Luke for Kylo. She, disposed of the Praetorian guards. She is very protective of him. It's very interesting because, you see her many times, shooting first, but, if somebody else is threatening her, Kylo, Rey becomes, a lioness that defends him. And it's the other way around, he is making traps, I'm going to destroy her, but, the moment Snoke started to torture her, he killed him, so it's exactly the same thing, they make threats, but don't let other people, hurt, yeah.
That's an insight, because basically they can, go after each other, but the moment somebody else threatens either one of them, the other's all up. It's not happening.
It's not happening. So I'm really worried about the First Order and the Resistance, because the First Order wants to hurt Rey and the Resistance want to hurt Kylo. So what's going to happen?
It's going to be them against the galaxy, I think.
Yeah,
hopefully, yes.
It's going to be us against the world kind of scenario, us against the galaxy.
Bring it.
Yeah, and Clarice and Lecter end up that way, but it's in a... Well, you have to remember that this is a completely different genre, too, so, but it takes on a much darker ending than I would definitely expect for, children's fantasy.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of children's fantasy, I just wanted to say that, a lot of people expect Kylo to, make a sacrifice for Rey and die at the end, right? So something similar to the pure Villainous Crush turning into the most selfless of love, right? But I don't think that, he would say that, because it's a mutual love story. So maybe a kiss of life, revives him in the end. It's a fairy tale. They were teasing us with all those Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, references in The Force Awakens and in The Last Jedi. So, I don't think, that it's going to end that way.
No, well, and good thing we have, a fourth option, because that's what fantasy genre, and especially, children and fairy tale genres fit into better, is option D. So, Tina, do you want to take the lead on?
So thank goodness we do have another pattern here. So, it's also a combination of A and B, but with a character's villainous crush, intensifying only to be transformed into true selfless love in the final act. This is the pattern that Ben Solo most closely fit. Going back to Spike as an example, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He's killed every Slayer that has stood against him, until Buffy. And then he falls for her. And to say that he doesn't know how to handle this is an understatement. He gets to the point where he's determined to take his shotgun and kill her, but ends up sitting down and letting her confide in him. So now, in true villainous fashion, once he accepts these feelings, he's much more open to them than she is. But eventually they end up in a heated physical battle that ends up with their sexual union literally bringing down a house, which foreshadows the destructive nature of their relationship. Anyways, although the two do fall in love with each other and have a lot of passion, they're mutually destructive. His behavior actually gets worse and worse until he finally crosses a hard line when he almost forces himself on her after she dumps him. This actually ends up being the catalyst for his transformation. He goes off on his own, and while they do not end up back together, nor would I personally advocate for that, he determines to redeem himself and does exactly that by sacrificing himself for her. Vane can actually tell us about a crush that actually ends much happier.
Oh yes, fortunately, unlike 19th century and like 1990s, etc., like that love, like tragedy and stuff, like the Greeks, ancient Greeks, had to cheer up brides-to-be, so they gave us the happiest villainous crush of all time. Persephone was the beautiful daughter of the goddess Demeter, so famous for her beauty that the god of underworld Hades developed a villainous crush, decided to abduct her and make her his wife. So the ground opened, Hades popped up in his chariot with 4 black horses, scared everyone and carried Persephone away. Her mother clung onto the chariot trying to stop them, but they rode back into the underworld, ground closing behind them, like big drama. So Persephone was scared and sad and hated her husband at first and the dark place she was to live in. So she was refusing food, but her husband treated her well, and slowly he wooed her into eating a pomegranate. Considering its sweet taste and red dripping juice, it's easy to see that the fruit itself symbolized the first consumption of their marriage. So Persephone fell in love with her husband, well, assuming sex was obviously good, so that helped, and his villainous crush turned into true love. Because she was longing for her mother, he set her free, not knowing whether she would ever come back. And mother and daughter indeed reunited, and Demeter thought that Persephone would stay with her forever. But because Persephone ate the fruit, and she really missed her husband and wanted to go back to him, she loved him, it was decided that she would spend half a year with him, half a year with her mom. In this case, the villain from the beginning of the story wasn't a villain at all, but a metaphor for maturity and marriage. Girls in ancient Greece were married off as soon as they started to bleed, so they couldn't be children for long and stay with their parents. Going away to husband's place was certainly traumatic, like an abduction. Some ancient marriage rituals actually involved real abduction or a stage, but it was, I think the name is Repito. So this story taught the girls that there were sweet things in the marriage, and therefore they will never want to be children again and live with their parents. So everyone happy.
So that's really interesting, what you mentioned about the pomegranate representing the loss of virginity and consummation of marriage. Because I never thought of it like that, but I'm sure the teachers, of course, were going to tell me that in 7th grade English class. And it also seems like, her mother, as a mature adult, could smell the sex on her when she came back. But that's my reading.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, but because when I teach my middle schoolers this myth, we do talk about the red pomegranate stain that Demeter finds on her daughter's lips after she's been to the underworld, because, we talk about the symbolism. Now, obviously this has, like you said, a sexual connotation, but we more or less skirt around that, and we get to the symbolism in Persephone becoming a woman in a different way, because, of course, the girls are like, oh, she was wearing white before she went to the underworld, and she's wearing makeup now. That means she grew up. And I'm like, yep, you nailed it.
Oh, wait. This sounds familiar, very familiar. Who else stopped wearing white and put the makeup and mascara when she shipped herself in a coffin, Snow White coffin to be precise, to Ben Solo? Who was that?
The date night outfit is what I like to call it. But yeah, ever since becoming involved with this fandom, I've learned so much regarding subtext. From the Jared throwing the snake at Sarah and Labyrinth representing very much a phallic symbol, to Rey, of course, entering the vagina cave on Act 2. It's amazing how many metaphors there are for a heroine discovering her own sexuality in literature without coming right out and saying it, which, of course, makes it available to all audiences. So, as a 12-year-old kid just on the verge of discovering what life was actually like, the story of Persephone and Hades spoke to me. Even if I didn't know exactly why or, couldn't put it into words, that was probably my favorite myth of everything that was taught to me while I was in school. Plus, I absolutely love the explanation of the change of seasons, which, of course, I believe represents birth, life, and death.
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. So I want to make a quick distinction here because it would bother me if I didn't. When Faye says Hades wasn't actually a villain at all, that's absolutely accurate. So villain is not synonymous with antagonist. An antagonist is just a character who opposes the protagonist in some manner. So in the beginning of the story, Persephone sees Hades, who wants to take her away from childhood and her mother, as an antagonist. Later, it's actually Demeter, so the mother, who takes on an antagonistic role by wanting to keep her daughter a little girl forever. So you might say that Hades has more of an antagonistic crush, if you want to be very technical. Now, if we're thinking along these lines, then another example of option D is in The Godfather. So this story is like Talia al Ghul and Batman, in that it begins as mutual romance and devolves due to Michael becoming a villain. So like Rey and Ben, Michael and Kay even have their own Clodor moment. Okay, oh, wait a minute. I guess we should explain Clodor to our audience. Clodor is a very fandom-specific vernacular that I'll let Vad explain because she is the one who coined it.
Okay, I didn't exactly coin it. I just, kind of initiated the coining. It was another Reylo who did it, so I'll just explain how the word, began. It's a word play on Game of Thrones Hodor. Hodor, as the fans of the show know, evolved Hold the Door. Hodor. So yes, Hodor, yes. Clodor evolved from
Close the door.
Reylo haters repeating, she closed the door. Rey closed the door. So we were joking that they are saying, she closed the door, closed the door, closed door, closed door, closed door. So that's how Clodor came to be. Relocators or antis, if you want to call them, they have their they have their mantras. So before the Force Awakens, it was incest when they believed that Rey was a Skywalker and they were cousins. And now it's Clodor because they don't have anything else.
Okay, so now that you know what Clodor is, Michael Clodors Kay at the end of the second act in a 3-act story, they end up reconciling. Love and sorrow for what he has lost redeems Michael, catalyzing his decision to retire from being Dawn of the Mafia. They end up admitting that they still have feelings for each other and always will, and Michael asks Kay's forgiveness. Their story still ends in tragedy, but the major takeaway here is that they reconcile and he redeems himself. So I'll reiterate what I've said in other podcasts. A closed door, Clodor, implies the door can open again. You also see this in Edward Scissorhands, just offhand, and by the way, he's not a villain or even an antagonist. He's the protagonist, but he is a quote-unquote monster with a crush. He's looking longingly after Kim at one point and sees her close the van door on him to join her cruel boyfriend. Edward actually ends up killing the cruel boyfriend to protect Kim, and she kisses him and tells him that she loves him in the end, so yeah, guess that door opened back up after all, too. Sorry, don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but the Clodor misinterpretation annoys me so freaking much because that's just not what door symbolism means. and I want it buried in a grave in the Jakku Desert beside Rey's deadbeat parents.
I just want to say something about Lotor. It's the similar thing with the Force Awakens when the ground opens between them and like creates like this, and separates them, right? So the ground opened to be bridged. Like not to stay, not to keep them separated forever, but so that they can bridge it. And in the Force Awakens, the gap was bridged. So it's the same thing with the door. Like the door is closed so that it can be open.
Exactly.
And I think too, if it was really done and buried, we'd have a burning bridge. Now, if it were a burning bridge, I'd be worried because the symbolism for that is, it's never going to be recreated. But a doors open and shut all the time.
Right.
So,
yes. Yeah. Exactly.
There's no way that door is shut permanently, and for Rey and Ben's love story and sexual attraction to never be addressed again because Rey is pissed at him in the moment, that just doesn't ring true. Given that a large percentage of the audience did not pick up on the very non-platonic nature of the relationship in TFA, I'll never understand because so many thought they were cousins, but that's of course a podcast for another time. Their dynamic in The Last Jedi is a brand new concept to those viewers. So it's not going to be just left there to die and then never be picked up again. That just isn't how storytelling works. So she shut the door or she closed the door is, literally the new Rey Walker mantra. Well, it's something, that many viewers believe. It's simply not going to be the case.
Well, it's definitely not, and for a myriad of reasons. Just one more example of option D, and probably my favorite, is one I've mentioned before, Catwoman and Batman. There are a few iterations of this arc across mediums, but the one that most closely follows the arc that Rey and Ben are following is Christopher Nolan's version. So Catwoman and Batman are complicated enemies, if you will, and in the Nolan verse they meet because she's a cat burglar who poses as a maid and steals his mother's necklace. As the plot continues, they get further entangled, and it's clear, although they're enemies, there's a distinct sexual tension that's developing between them. But they're still antagonistic toward each other, while simultaneously trying to, mutually seduce each other toward the other's perspective. So Selina, Catwoman, has a dark past she's trying to get rid of. She's led to believe by some bad guys that she can destroy her past by wiping her criminal record. We find out that this can't actually happen later in the film, spoiler alert. Bruce, too, is wrestling with his own dark past, as usual because he always is wrestling with his murdered parents, as well as the problem of feeling that Gotham needs him and he's not able to pass on the torch of Batman once he picks it back up again. So Selina tries to get him to abandon his ideals because, after all, what does he owe these awful people who drove him into hiding in the first place? Well, she ends up betraying him to Bane and Talia, so that is what I would consider her Renferer moment, where it's it seems like she's getting better, and then it's I'll destroy him. But Bruce still believes that deep down Selina's a good person, and of course, he's right, because in spite of how much she claims to hate Gotham and all the wealthy old assholes in it, and that she's just in this to look out for herself, she ends up redeeming herself by helping Bruce save his beloved Gotham City. In the end, they both leave their old lives behind, so letting the past go, if you will, and they run away together. So some other commonalities between the Bat and the Cat and Reylo. With foreshadowing, I mentioned earlier Selina has stolen Bruce's late mother's pearl necklace, so this actually foreshadows her taking the place of Mrs. Wayne. So this is just like Rey taking up ownership of Ben's legacy objects, the Falcon, Han's blaster, the saber. She's basically inadvertently making herself the future daughter-in-law. Or color coding. Bruce is color-coded in grays and whites when they dance, and this is like Rey. So suggesting a heroic character taking on experience. Selina is color-coded in black and red. Oh gee, where have we seen this before? With a mask even. And the only white is Bruce's mother's pearls, which is pretty significant. So it's this bit of light that she's taken by being where he is. Plus, Snow Fight and Throne Fight, so in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi respectively, are coded dances, just like the very traditional romantic coded dance that Bruce and Selina share. A lot of the same romantically coded blocking is used between the characters. And for instance, the villainess whispers seductively into the hero Batman's ear, like Kylo appearing to whisper in Rey's ear in the forest. So what I really love about Nolan's character development here is that Batman is first involved with Rachel Dawes, who is a paragon of goodness. But the Joker kills her, plus she was actually set to marry Harvey Dent anyway. Batman then gets involved with Miranda Tate in The Dark Knight Rises, who is actually Talia al Ghul posing as this wealthy charity lady. So he thinks he's met another paragon of goodness. But in the Nolan-verse, Talia ends up backstabbing Bruce and has used him to carry out her father's plan for the destruction of Gotham. The thing about Bruce clinging to women on a pedestal is, one, they're not his equals. And two, putting people on a pedestal sets Bruce up for disappointment because, let's face it, no one is perfect. Well, finally, at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce ends up running off with Selina, which is foreshadowed with Alfred's earlier statement in the movie that he hoped that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he hopes that Bruce will one day leave Batman behind and basically settle down with a nice woman. So this ends up being a touching moment in the end because Alfred gets to see the boy he raised into a man actually leading the normal, happy life that he wanted for him with a woman that we can presume that Bruce and Selina fall in love with each other. So now, although we understand that Selina's motives for choosing a life of crime are sympathetic, and she does end up doing the right thing and helping Bruce, and the final scene implies they've left their old lives behind, what I actually really like about, I like that Bruce wants to see her while she's still Catwoman, because it implies that Bruce has grown as a man and as a character. He's moved from paragons of goodness to really practicing what he preaches and accepting a love interest who has a past like him and is flawed. The trait that distinguishes Bruce, and he shares this trait with Rey, is his optimism and belief in the inherent goodness of humanity. But he didn't get there on his own. Before Rachel chastises and rejects him in Batman Begins, he's set on seeking vengeance against his parents' murderer. But because of his involvement with Rachel and wanting to prove himself, he seeks world experience so he can understand what drives criminals to do what they do. Because of this, he comes to the conviction that most people are inherently good. Selina is Bruce's equal. She is like him. Because he has his own dark past with dark motives, he's able to relate to her and influence her for the good. This is very similar to Rey and Ben, who are equals. Rey sees the good man that Ben could be and wants him to come to her side. Also, like Bruce, Rey is not afraid to express her feelings for someone who is deeply imperfect and on the opposite side of the battlefield. In fact, one of the aspects of Rey's heroine's journey that stands out to me is that she is allowed to feel attraction toward, and even some form of love for a villainous character before he's made any real physical effort toward redemption, which is something that male heroes are often allowed. Batman, Wolverine, Green Lantern, Iron Man, Daredevil, shoot, even Luke Skywalker himself in the EU are all allowed to have villainous love interests. Female heroes with villain love interests aren't unheard of, but they're much rarer than male heroes with villain love interests. Usually, when a boy villain loves a girl hero very much, she must remain an object of virtue and is not allowed to return those feelings like in our options A and B. And if she does, it's often characterized as destructive. Maybe this is due to societal roles and mores still being differentiated between men and women. But the thing is, if the shoes were reversed, so if Rey were the villain and Kylo the hero, there would never have been a question about the direction the sequel trilogy was headed in. But the villain takes off his mask and, surprise, it's an attractive young man rather than a grotesque Vader 2.0, so naturally people completely skip over the giant elevator eyes the heroine gives him and think, oh, she's got to be his sister cousin.
Yeah, she gives him those elevator eyes too, not once, but twice in the interrogation scene.
It's true, I just want to say that it's good observation that Rey develops feelings for Kylo before he redeemed himself, while he's still, the guy who killed his father, so it's a great thing in my opinion because that's what makes heroes stand apart from everyone else. They have the ability to see something in villains that other people don't. Everyone turns away from them, but the hero has the level of compassion and life and capacity to see the good in the villain. So that's something that Luke also saw in Vader when everyone else thought that it was over, like Obi-Wan, Yoda, they all thought that Vader was beyond redemption, but Luke, loved his father before he redeemed himself. So in this case, Rey has strong feelings for Kylo before he, as you say, even even started to, redeem himself, let alone completely redeem himself. Basically, Villainous Crush ended when he took off his mask and she liked what she saw. It became mutual. Anyone who ever thought that Reylo is prototype of Villainous Crush story, it ended at the moment when he pulled off his mask. Ray was like, oh wow, he's hot. So, yeah. But yes, going back to Clodor, story simply has to go in direction of opening the door because they're the main characters. Their relationship is the heart of the story. He's the last Skywalker. Their relationship decides whether, Skywalkers, die or not. And secret lover Kylo is much more interesting thing because Rey's beautiful friendship, woohoo gang, is not going to react positively when they find out. So, and for dramatic tension, they have to find out about the Force bond, the fact that she let the new supreme leader live when she had the chance to kill him. Those are really big things that the next movie has to deal with.
Oh, yeah. No, I can see that argument. And actually, you mentioned Secret Lover Kylo. I think actually both Secret Lover Kylo and non-consummated until redemption are both feasible story routes. We'll talk a little bit about plot structure here again, because the structure is a major component that tells you which of our 4 patterns they're actually following. Ben Solo's villainous crush and then mutual attraction began in Act 1. Then the villainous crush type behavior intensified in Act 2 of a 3-act story. So just remember, once again, if there is no conflict, then there is no story. So the plot structure of an established villainous crush in Act 1, then a worsening in Act 2 with essentially she'll join me or I'll destroy her, means they're setting up a dramatic reversal for Ben Solo in Act 3. The purpose of Clodor, like you said, is to set up a question in the audience's mind of, is the door really closed? Will they or won't they? That question has to be reestablished in Act 1 of Episode 9, by the way. So Act 1 will reestablish the status quo from Act 3 of The Last Jedi. They're mad at each other, but it's because they have feelings for each other. So we should expect a dramatic reversal of information, such as Clodor, that suggests Ben has lost a chance at being a pair. In addition, in Act 1, he proposes to be her teacher and she knocks him on his ass. In Act 2, he proposes they rule together and he gets knocked on his ass. So in Act 3, this is like what I call the rule of 3. So if they've done something twice, you should expect the third thing to be the reversal. So it'll reverse the trend. So Act 3 is when the trend reverses. So once again, they're setting up an expectation that he'll make a proposal to her, but this time she'll accept and, I don't know, whatever the reversal of knocking him on his ass is, pulling him up to his feet maybe. His story arc most closely follows option D, just like Spike, Hades, and Nolan's Catwoman. It begins, it seems to worsen, it takes a dramatic turn into redemption. So, what category does my love for Allura fall under?
Well, due to the special quality of writing for 80s children's programming, your all-over-the-map crush is, how would you put it? One of a kind.
Well, basically, Prince Lotor makes a dark side marriage proposal pretty much weekly.
Every day.
He seems to, every time he thinks of her, he seems to develop genuine love for Allura while she goes from hating him to developing an attraction to him and beginning to notice him as a man. Then, for some inexplicable reason, the show got canceled. He tries to blow up the entirety of Team Voltron. Oh, wait, he's pretty much the sexually active version of Ben Solo if Episode 9 got canceled.
Exactly. I'm convinced, actually, that the 80s Voltron, which I was a huge fan of child, that was set up for Lotor and Allura's endgame. But I suppose that would take an entire podcast as to why, so we'll save that for another time. But when I mentioned earlier about Rey and Allura meeting and comparing notes, I'm actually trying to imagine what it would be like if Ben and Lotor met, and also compare their love lives.
That poor man is haunted by a beautiful face that regularly puts him on his ass.
So, well, Lotor, speaking of which, do you have any advice for Ben? Maybe something that could help him stay off his ass?
That's Prince Lotor and Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. Show some respect.
Oh, pardon the F out of me. Anyway, Your Highness, in your expert opinion, how is Supreme Leader Ren doing at this whole Villainous Crush thing?
Well, he did great with the abduction, 10 out of 10 for carrying her across the threshold. Watching her while she sleeps, then making his, interest clear by getting all up in her personal space is also a nice touch. But I have some concerns about his proposal. Oh yeah, that, your nothing bit was pretty, whew. No, that part I'm actually fine with. It's the please part that's a problem. You don't beg a woman to stay with you. You assert your manliness and you tell her, be my bride.
Yeah, that seemed to work out well for you.
And another thing. He needs to get himself a harem. What kind of galactic overlord doesn't have a harem?
I am very, very certain that Ben Solo wouldn't have the first clue to what to do with a harem.
Idiots. Surrounded by idiots. What does a man usually do with a harem? Well, there are some fans who want the Knights of Ren to be written as a solely female group, and that's definitely how that would come off. But poor Ben is having enough trouble keeping one particular girl around, Skywalker hair notwithstanding. Listen, if you don't have a great personality, you've got to have good hair. And I'll say this much for Kylo. His hair is on point. Don't take this the wrong way. His physique is on the mark, too. I mean, not as good as mine, but then again.
Your Highness, I know this is awkward, but we all know about your little shoulder pad secret.
What?
Yeah, Merla announced it to the whole world. She said you make your muscles look bigger than they are with padding. This is so awkward.
Why, I'll have you girls know I have massive muscles, big bombs, gargantuan guns, and a daunting...
Wow, it's getting really hot in here. And with that, folks, I think it's time for a wrap. It's been great chatting with you all and discussing one of my favorite type of story tropes of all time. Please feel free to email us with comments, questions, and feedback. We love hearing from you. We are Star Wars Connection, and we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye!